morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel, Future-Proofing Infrastructure, Democratizing Data for the AI Generation, brought to you by our friends at Alteryx, SandboxAQ, Plotly, and Zenlytic. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to discuss how industry leaders are adapting data infrastructure to ensure it scales with the evolving landscape of AI-powered innovation. As organizations race to harness the transformative power of AI, aligning infrastructure with the demands of AI and data democratization has become a strategic imperative. From integrating data governance frameworks to optimizing cloud and hybrid solutions, this session will provide actionable insights on building resilient systems that support seamless data access and AI readiness. Whether you're navigating challenges in infrastructure scalability, enhancing data quality, or embedding AI across organizational functions, this discussion will help you with the tools to future-proof your tech stack. We're honored today to hear from a panel of distinguished experts: Stefan Leichenauer, VP of Engineering at SandboxAQ, Jonathan Lounsbury, Principal Engineer at Alteryx, and Nathan Drezner, Technical Product Manager at Plotly. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features throughout the webinar. We're dedicating a portion throughout the webinar to Q&A, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn more about data democratization and data infrastructure and AI, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors Alteryx, SandboxAQ, Plotly, and Zenlytic. Now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome our panelists to the stage. Welcome, guys. Nice to have you all join us today. And we'll kick things off by just doing some quick introductions, about 30 seconds. If you guys could just go around, and I'm going to start with the order that you appear on my screen. So why don't we kick it off with Stefan?
Thanks, Brian. Happy to be here. So Stefan Leichenauer, VP of Engineering at SandboxAQ. I've been with SandboxAQ since it started. We spun out of Alphabet a couple of years ago, and I've been the VP of Engineering the whole time. My background actually is in physics. My prior life before joining Sandbox was as a physicist, but nowadays most of the action is in AI, especially generative AI. So very happy to be here and to discuss all that's going on. And, the topic of future proofing is a very important one.
Excellent. Welcome, Stefan. Nathan?
I'm Nathan Drezner. I'm a technical product manager at Plotly. Plotly, I work primarily on our open source libraries, which hopefully folks in this session have heard of, including Dash, which is our web framework, and Plotly.py and Plotly.js, our graphing libraries, which have, I think, more than 50 chart types these days and are super powerful in the analytics space and, of course, in the AI space as well. I also work on App Studio, Dash Enterprise, which are some of our enterprise products that we offer. And folks may not know this, but we're a Canadian company. I'm normally based out of Montreal. If anyone's in the area, feel free to reach out. I'd love to grab a coffee.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. And Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. So my name is John Lounsbury. I'm the principal engineer for Alteryx's AI and ML org. Been with Alteryx about 3 years, started off as the architect for our cloud machine learning platform. Since the AI boom, we've started doing a lot of work with AI, so have grown into working on that as well. Been in the data space for close to a decade, previously working on some data engineering platform stuff. And prior to that, just, software architecture and software engineering for the rest of my career. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. Welcome to all of you, and appreciate you joining us today. So we're going to kick things off just kind of high level. Obviously, AI and Gen AI specifically are impacting all kinds of things: data democratization, data infrastructure, data architecture. What are you guys seeing as being some of the most significant ways that Gen AI is impacting sort of architecture design, the tech stack, data democratized, data access? Take your pick. Kind of what do you think are some of the most significant impacts that folks need to think about as they're trying to scale their infrastructure? Why don't we start with Jonathan on that one?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there are a couple of specific areas where Gen AI is having a really big impact. One is just in figuring out what you need to do to prep your data, to transform your data. Gen AI is extremely powerful at doing that exploratory data analysis and understanding what steps you need to take next. And then also helping you to get to that 80% solution really quickly when you figure out, all right, this is how I need to clean my data. This is how I need to transform my data to solve my problem. Gen AI can really accelerate you to get that code written, that workflow written to do what you need to do. Maybe it's not going to be completely production ready or completely hardened, but it's going to be able to get you to that 80% solution really fast. And then finally, I think Gen AI is also unlocking really new and or improved ways to process your data. So thinking about like previously doing OCR, now, these LLMs can look at PDF images and really accurately understand what's in there, summarizing data, doing sentiment analysis, cleaning up data in really broad ways. So yeah, I think those are some of the big ways that Gen AI is impacting the data architecture.
Yeah, great points. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one place that I think it's super exciting is with unstructured data. With Gen AI, unstructured data becomes way more interesting. You don't need to spend hours and hours cleaning up your data set. You can bring it in, you can feed it straight to the context window. If you have the ability, obviously, it's possible to build a custom RAG or use a vector database in order to get more sophisticated answers to questions about your underlying data set. For me, this has been really useful in product. I'm able to pull out data sets that otherwise would be pretty much impossible to run analytics on, get a better sense of, and of course, generate some summaries or pull out the interesting bits. So those pieces are really exciting to me. I think pull those rusty data sets out and give them another whirl using AI as a tool to help play with them. Another piece in terms of the data analytics pipelines is a lot of the chores of data analytics are way easier now with Gen AI. Obviously I'm at Plotly, building Plotly charts, basic dash apps, running pandas commands. You don't have to be digging around in the docs in order to get things done. You can just rip away with a couple of quick questions and get to that 80% point really quickly. So those are some key places that I'm seeing impact.
Yeah, great points. Stefan, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's being said so far. I think another point that's important to make is that in this era that we find ourselves in and the way things are going, data of multiple modalities being used all at the same time is becoming more and more of a thing, right? So you can combine, say, information that you have hidden away in your documents somewhere, but then combine that with what you're getting from audio or video or images or any kind of specific sensors, software-based sensors or physical sensors that you have. And these things are all all these data streams are being combined and processed at the same time by these new big foundation models. And that's unlocking a lot of very interesting capabilities. But it also means from a data infrastructure point of view that, well, you need to have you need to have data pipelines that are capable of handling all of that and feeding all of that into these models.
Yeah, great point, Stefan. And that leads us very nicely into our next question, which is on exactly that point, the infrastructure. So obviously, generative AI unlocks lots of potential applications that maybe would have been much more difficult or even impossible before. But now, once you do this at scale across an organization, it's one thing to do it in proof of concept, but to roll this out in a large enterprise with lots and lots of data, lots and lots of users, lots and lots of demands on the infrastructure is a very different thing. So what do you guys think are some of the key considerations for aligning infrastructure with those growing demands? We'll start with you on that one, Nathan.
Yeah, I think one question that I've been personally very interested lately in terms of scaling infrastructure for AI demands is the first question is, do you want to self-host a model or do you want to use a cloud-based model like OpenAI, Gemini, Anthropic, or any of the others that are out there? I think self-hosted models are becoming more and more compelling as an offering. You can obviously build and host and use them inside of a VPC if you're at that kind of organization. And really, the question depends on what is your data privacy levels that you need. Are you comfortable with the accuracy of some of these LLMs? And are you willing to deal with the pain in the ass that it might be in order to get those LLMs hosted inside of your network, which it might be worth that. But obviously, if you're not doing that, there's a lot of strategy you can use to keep your data safe if you're working with a cloud hosting provider. So that's a big open question for me. Another one is keeping an eye on technologies for in-memory data processing. At Plotly, we're really excited about tools like DuckDB, which make it easy to take a large data set, work with it in Python, simplify it, move things around before you pass it into an LLM. So if you're working just with the context window of the model you're playing with, it can be really useful to take that big data, crunch it into something that's a lot smaller and easier to deal with, and then start putting it forward to the AI, which can make small models easier or more sophisticated in that regard. But it also can reduce the amount of information you might be sending if you're using a SaaS model.
Yeah, great points about sort of the self-hosted versus cloud-based. Stefan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, well, just I guess a comment on the self-hosted cloud-based question. There's a whole spectrum of possibilities to consider there, and different aspects of it that one wants to consider. Some of it is risk profile, security, privacy, where do you want to be sending your data? But other aspects include things like cost and maintenance costs, like the whole this is really it's the same kind of debate, it's the same kind of cloud debate in some sense that has been going on for a decade of how much do you rely on economies of scale from a cloud versus how much do you try and do yourself, and there's a cost aspect to it as well as a data risk aspect of it. But focusing on the costs for a second, one thing that's very important for any organization to consider as use of AI and the data, more and more data and more AI models are being run, is making sure that the right kinds of observability are in there in terms of like what you're using, how much you're using. It's very easy, especially if you're using, say, a cloud provider, to rack up huge costs accidentally if you're not careful, and making sure that you have an eye on that and moving toward predictability in that domain is very important. And that differs organization to organization, but it's an important thing to keep track of.
Yeah, those are great points. And data observability and AI observability, we've seen a lot of emerging interest in those areas over the last couple of years, particularly in light of these developments. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, really good points thus far. With a lot of these questions, I find it helpful to segment my thinking in terms of AI assistance, AI technology that's helping you do something, and AI powered data processing, using AI to do something with your data. Because I think the needs are unique, although there are some things that are shared across both. For those assistant use cases, kind of piggybacking on that idea of observability, I think it's really important to provide your organization with a really easy way to get access to a well-governed assistant that you can monitor, that you can keep track of, that you can approve use of. And so because otherwise people are going to want to use these and they're going to go off and do their own things and rack up costs in lots of different providers and maybe be leaking proprietary data in a way that you don't want to. So providing that way for people to get access to an assistant that can help them do their job with data in a central governed way is, I think, really important for setting up infrastructure for assistance. And then for data processing, totally agree that there's this, debate on, do I want to use a cloud hosted model, a proprietary model? Do I want to try to go it my own and deploy an open source model either on premises hardware or on cloud hardware? My 2 cents there is hosting your own models is a really big investment. There's lots of developer time, lots of cost. The GPU instances on the cloud are often really hard to actually get because they're in such high demand. So I would say, start with POCs and lean on the major players there: Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Anthropic, OpenAI, and really prove out your use case with those players that have these very capable LLMs readily deployed. And then you can start to peel off small use cases and say, hey, you know what? An open source LLM that I host myself would do a really good job here and save me a lot of cost. And so you can start thinking about it once you have those use cases really well defined.
Yeah, great point. And there's a real need to balance, I think, in all of this, that you got to move fast, but you have to do it in a way that's sustainable. And so that's one way to do that, right? Is to validate some of those use cases, figure out what's actually going to move the needle from a business standpoint. And then, all right, if we need additional controls in place for security reasons or otherwise, maybe that's something we look into expending resources on, but after we've already validated that this is a valuable use case. We've got a question in the chat that I'm going to pop up here. Mujan says, I would love to hear from the speakers how they see Gen AI changing the structure of databases and new forms or models of data discovery in large databases. Seeing some companies creating APIs and services specifically for LLM-based search in databases. Any of you guys want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I can give a little bit of context there. I saw an interesting announcement from Anthropic recently about this thing that they're developing called the Model Context Protocol. And it is a standard way to provide LLMs and agents with access to data of various kinds. And so I think we're going to see, more things like that of this is a standard way to provide an LLM the ability to access data, whether it's through this model context protocol or whether it's some other solution. So maybe not necessarily changing the structure of databases, but having a really solid API for being able to access data wherever it resides.
I'd add to that, I also saw that announcement and I thought it was quite interesting. And, one personal use case that I saw immediately was you can hook that into your Obsidian Vault and start to run LLMs against your Obsidian Vault, which stuff like that is pretty interesting. And obviously that's, on a pretty small scale, but I can easily imagine those use cases expanding to, hit a hosted database or something like that, take it a bit further. And there's also other tools that come from OpenAI and Anthropic that really help with this. Like, even if you're not using some other provider, you can leverage stuff off the shelf from them, like structured outputs from OpenAI. We love structured outputs at Plotly, and we use them all over our product where we're using AI because consistency in results from an LLM is quite difficult. And it's really important if you're trying to deliver something to folks and deliver something to analysts. So, taking advantage of the tools that these providers have in place is a great way to jumpstart that connection to databases.
Anything to add there, Stefan?
No, I mean, I think it was basically covered. I feel like I'll maybe double down a little bit on Jonathan's statement / prediction about how in the future, probably the more important thing is going to be just having ways to point these models toward the data where it is, and the models themselves will figure out how to extract the data in the best way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And while we're on the subject of pointing AI towards data, I think that's a good kickoff for the next question, which is how can organizations effectively balance advancing AI capabilities with ensuring robust governance and compliance in their systems? So when you're pointing an LLM at data that maybe wasn't envisioned to be used in a certain way or by certain people, especially in highly regulated industries or where the data may be sensitive, how do you make sure that you adjust your governance and compliance? Maybe the data was being used in one way and now you're having a chatbot engage with it, and that opens up a whole new world of potential governance issues. So Stefan, why don't you speak to that one first?
Yeah, this is a very important issue, and it's something that is that we come across at Sandbox all the time. We deal in industries and with customers who have these regulations, be it HIPAA or things in the financial sector, et cetera. And it's not just our own data, but what about our customers' data, right? How are they thinking about it? And it's an evolving thing, right? The regulations are always changing, the models are always changing, the ways in which we would like to use data are always changing. So for me, I think the key word here is adaptability, right? And being prepared to go with the changes as they happen and make sure you're keeping track of everything. And so from an organizational perspective, when it comes to thinking about compliance and governance and so on, it's very important to make sure that there is a person or persons in charge of monitoring all of that, who is in charge of governance, who is keeping an eye on all of these things, where does the buck stop for making sure that the latest changes are being taken into account, that we're asking all of the right questions, and that we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing. You have to balance going fast versus overstepping.
Absolutely. And this is such a rapidly evolving space with every day there's the ability to do new things that you couldn't do yesterday. And so adaptability, I agree, is totally key in this space right now, as we start to envision new use cases that previously we hadn't even thought about. Nathan, why don't you take that one next?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think observability came up earlier, and it's pretty important. This is a hard question, honestly, because you can go use, ChatGPT today without even logging in. Someone could upload a CSV of protected data, and it's pretty hard. So, it happens a lot on the individual level within an organization. Having really clear and transparent policies in an organization around how to use these tools is super important. And making sure that staff members know what they can and can't send to hosted models is a big deal. So that happens at the org level. At the individual level, something I was thinking about with this question is you don't need to send all your data over to a hosted model in order to get an accurate or a useful result. Oftentimes it's enough if you're working with a data set to send over just the headers and types of the data set, and you can generate code, get some ideas on how to work with it from there. So those summaries are important. Prompt engineering is important, and it's ways to take advantage of these tools without giving it your social security number.
Absolutely. Jonathan, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think spot on with, saying that we should be looking at ways to increase observability and provide policies at the organization level about how you should be using the LLMs, given that if you want people to actually follow those policies, you have to make it easy to get access to LLMs to be able to use them the way you want to do the work that you want. And so, having that central access point where your organization has approved certain LLMs to be able to be accessed and making it really easy for your company to get those LLMs. And ideally, that central point will also do some auditing for you and make sure that people are using them the way you expect. That's kind of the vision that we're having at Alteryx as we're adding Gen AI based tools to Alteryx. We want people to configure those, an admin to configure those in the Alteryx Cloud Platform so that then anybody who's using Alteryx can access them. So that's the approach we're taking. And I think it enables this observability, which is so key.
Yeah, great points. So we mentioned earlier kind of data quality, and I want to dig into that aspect of this for a moment as well. What practical steps or frameworks can organizations adopt to ensure high quality data for their AI systems while expanding access? Obviously, the quality of your AI model is only going to be as good as the data that you feed into it. So what can organizations do as they're feeding in data that maybe they hadn't envisioned using in this way to ensure data quality with these systems? Jonathan, why don't you start us for that?
Yeah. So, when you're passing data to an LLM as a RAG source for additional context or, adding it to the prompts manually, I think it's really important to have a good framework to test whether the LLMs are using the data effectively and producing the correct results. So as you're processing data to include it in a vector database to support RAG, you have all these knobs, different kinds of chunking, different ways to strip out irrelevant information, different embedding models. You can change the prompt. So as you're turning those knobs, it's really important to have a set of test cases where you can say, all right, given that I have configured my data processing in this way, how well am I answering these questions with this data that I've put in the vector database or wherever? And then similarly for fine tuning, if you have a bunch of data that you're using for fine tuning a foundational LLM, you're going to want to have test cases to, once you fine tuned, is it doing what you want? So as you go through that process of modifying your data, whether you're being successful and if the model is continuing to produce the results that you want.
Nathan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's important to make sure that what you're putting in is good. I think before generative AI, data pipelining and ETL were crucial to any data analyst and data analyst's workflow, and today it's even more important. Really effective ETL, like leveraging that tooling right, finding data from multiple sources, joining it. If you're using that to fine tune, if you're just using that to pass into the context of a model, you need to do some pre-aggregation, human in the loop. You can't just hand things to a model and hope for the best. You got to do some work beforehand. And those steps, it takes time, it takes effort. making sure that data is up to date, making sure that those pipelines are continuously running. It's a big deal. That's a lot of work over time. But I think with LLMs, it's hugely important because otherwise, you're going to get a lot of gnarly outputs that may have hallucinations, may not be quite what you're looking for. So again, I think that human in the loop is really important. And I think I'll add too, in terms of how do you validate this stuff, you need a lot of prototyping and experimentation tools. Plotly, Dash, obviously I have to plug as tools here, but there are a lot of ways that you can just dig into that data, take a look at it before trying to use these results to prove something. We see plenty of examples of LLMs that have been used in movie trailers with fake quotes or anything like this. So you got to check. That's a human.
Absolutely. Stefan?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said, but I just want to come at this question from a slightly different angle. And in many cases, with a lot of questions like this, I think a lot of clarity, of approach can be can be gotten by thinking of things as products with customers and product owners, right? So if the data, think of the data as a product. Who is the owner of that product and who are the customers of that product? Who all is using the data? This is going to be a cross-functional set of people. It's not just the data scientists or the data maintainers or whatever. It's, what are the business cases that the data is being used for? Let's enumerate all of that and run and ask about, get customer feedback like we would for any product, and make sure that we're addressing that kind of feedback and that we're addressing actually the end needs, right? The business needs at the end, not just thinking about it from a technical point of view, but connecting it all the way to the ultimate business objective using, say, a product development style framework, which is a pretty good one. And then if you do that, then the parts that matter will sort of rise to the top, and you can make sure that you're checking all the right boxes.
Yeah, great points, and kicks off nicely into our next question. So in addition to data quality, a key piece of that is sort of the cultural aspects of what causes some data quality issues or causes siloed data, cultural resistance in organizations. So when you're in a large enterprise and you've got lots of different teams who might be using data in lots of different ways, maybe they have their own data teams that are not talking to each other. They have a variety of different levels of technical sophistication. All those things can make it very difficult at an enterprise level to have kind of one data or AI strategy. So how do you see organizations overcoming those barriers like siloed data, cultural resistance, limited technical expertise as they start to deploy these use cases in an enterprise way? Nathan, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We see this a lot with folks that are coming in from a data visualization or analytics team. They're trying to collaborate with the database team that's in a different department. They're trying to bring that data in, make sure that it can be consumed properly by whatever your front end of choice is. So sometimes, folks that aren't always data folks are trying to do these data transforms. I think a big piece is communication, even when it's difficult, even when it feels siloed, trying to figure out how you can leverage tools that have been built by other teams or other orgs and take advantage of them. It's really easy to build something 2, 3, 4 times if you don't do that. Another is experimentation. If you are working with quick prototyping tools in whatever language of choice or whatever product of choice, even if that's just a basic BI tool, you can experiment with an idea, see if it's actually worth taking further, and you can start small. You don't have to have a full data pipeline in place to prove out whether an idea is worth pursuing or not. And it can be a lot easier to validate an idea without building a full data pipeline first. So, try to recognize at any stage of the project if it's possible to solve a problem without needing to involve 6 teams and pull in data from 8 sources, or if you can validate that, just with a small mock-up or simple prototype. It's easy to try to skip to the end when you really just need a POC.
Yeah, great points. Stefan?
Yeah, I think if we're taking an org-wide point of view, it is and will be very important to have continued training and development for people on how to use these tools, what they're best for, what tools even exist, because things are moving so rapidly and only very few people are keeping track of exactly what's happening. And making sure that there are the mechanisms for keeping the whole organization updated. And that's a very challenging thing to do. You also at the same time don't want to try to boil the ocean and then fail. So it's one strategy to maybe get through this is to define something like an AI center of excellence of folks who are the experts on the bleeding edge. They're the ones who have all the answers, and maybe they can be a place for others to go to, or they can go around to others and basically help them on the AI journey. But I think at the org level, we have to recognize that for most people, this is something that's moving too fast to keep up with, and they need a lot of guidance and handholding, and we should provide that.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, we see in our organization, even leading data executives from Fortune 500 companies, is just things are coming too fast. They can't keep up with the latest technologies constantly. So they're really seeking guidance on how to do that. It's very challenging with the things have not moved at this speed in very many domains. And so to see things constantly every day that are new and different and exciting and potentially dangerous it's a lot to keep up with for folks who are trying to make decisions that are going to last 5, 10, 20 years about their infrastructure. Jonathan, anything to add to this one?
Yeah, I would say, when I think about embedding AI across different centers in an organization, I would recommend using a platform. Use a platform that provides access to all of your organization's data, that provides easy to use tools to leverage AI, and also provides the ability for a center of excellence, like Stefan was talking about, to develop higher level use cases and make those use cases available to different parts of the organization, because not everybody is going to be as familiar with the low level workings of how to optimize a prompt, how to include different context with RAG, which particular model to use. But if you can develop some use cases and provide those alongside the data, I think that enables the organization to do more and enables more people across your organization to do more with AI.
Our next question, as we talk about deploying these use cases, getting from proof of concept to production across large enterprises, that is much easier said than done, in part because many of these use cases are computationally intensive and data intensive, and put strain on organizational infrastructure that may be unexpected and maybe hasn't been tested before. So what are some of the ways that organizations can manage that? What unique challenges have you seen, and how do you think organizations can mitigate those challenges? I forgot who we started with last time. Why don't we start with you, Stefan?
Sure. So I think, we've touched on this topic a little bit earlier in the call, and one of the challenges that one faces is things like GPU availability, right? You don't always have a collection of the very powerful GPUs to run the biggest models. Even if you did, that's probably not what you should be doing for a given use case, right? Because there's issues of cost and latency and so forth. And so something that trickles down to the infrastructure level is thinking about use case by use case, what actually is the right tool for the job. And I think what we're starting to see and what we will see going forward is more emphasis on what's possible with processing on like edge processing, which include, in my mind, like things that you can do just on your own laptop, for example. For many use cases, can we have models that are hosted just on your laptop that you can use yourself? And that also solves a lot of the privacy and security type concerns, right? But we have to identify, so maybe saying again, the approach, there's not going to be a one size fits all approach where every application of AI is using the big model hosted in the cloud that is potentially very expensive or requires a lot of GPUs to run. We have to be a little bit more fine-grained with that. And if we do that, it'll make a lot of other problems, auxiliary problems, easier to address at the same time.
Yeah, great suggestions. Jonathan?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think focusing on those specific use cases and seeing if you can bring them to the end user is an interesting idea. I think if you try to do something like self-host a really highly capable LLM, you may think, oh, all I need to do is get access to a GPU, which, by the way, is very costly and easier said than done. But then it's so costly that you can't really leave it up all the time. And maybe then you need to start supporting auto scaling. And maybe you need to have warm pools that are ready to respond to a request, and it has the foundation model preloaded. And so all of a sudden it gets really hugely complex to try to host these things yourself. And so don't do that unless you really have to. I think there are a lot of really great companies that are investing a lot into making it really easy to access these models in the cloud. And as much as possible, I think organizations should rely on those, whether it's those highly capable closed source models that the big players offer, or some of those fine-tuned open source models that companies like Predabase allow you to access at lower cost. I think relying on these players who are figuring out those problems for you is really important for an organization whose core business is not hosting LLMs.
Yeah, great point. Nathan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were getting into earlier, I think we could probably spend the full hour just talking about the merits and drawbacks of hosted models. It's a big question right now. And I think, Stefan, you were alluding to, there really are three pathways. You can use one of the big players' hosted models and just plug that in. You can try to host something yourself within your own organization's firewall or whatever. And there's this third option that's emerging that you can just run it on your laptop. We're experimenting a lot with that here at Plotly. I think it's a pretty interesting piece of technology in this space. And I encourage folks who are motivated, interested in this topic. So I think the people on this call to give it a shot. Tools like Olama make it, it takes about 5 minutes to get a local model working. And you can get a small model with about 3 billion parameters running on your most modern laptops, even if they have only 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM. So it's super interesting to experiment with that stuff. I agree with Stefan and John. You guys both were saying yeah, hosting your own is brutal. I think in many cases it is. I'm seeing in some larger organizations, folks are doing this. These are companies where data security and privacy is paramount, financial and healthcare districts. So in those cases, it can make sense. If you're a smaller org, just running something on your laptop might be good. It might not give you the same quality. And again, using one of these, the big players models as well, it can work as long as you're aware of the risks of sharing too much data. But I think just hosting your own model it's really hard. It's a challenge you have to be willing to step up to. And John, you were talking about scaling. How do you make sure that things work when more load is hit on them? These are problems that a lot of companies out there are trying to solve today. And I bet there's going to be a lot of products in the space that are helping out with on-premise models, so you don't have to roll it yourself every time. But for everyone in this session, download Olama if you haven't yet, and take it for a spin and try out some of these small models on your laptop. It doesn't require a box in the cloud.
Yeah, interesting. And I wonder, I see a question in the chat from Lynn. I wonder, do you think this would work for her problem here? So she says that she's dealing with this right now. I guess the taxing demands of large language models on her resources. IT is pushing them to use VM rather than allow us to have more powerful laptops, which freeze with just 100,000 records. Any thoughts on VMs versus other setups? So anybody seeing VMs as a solution to this, or what do you guys think is a better option?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I would say, see if you can work with AI or with your IT organization and legal, if that's what needs to get involved, and look into the guarantees that are provided by some of these big players about use of your data in terms of how long it's stored. Most of the time it's really not stored, whether it's used for fine tuning, things like that. You might be surprised when you look at actually the terms and conditions, what your IT organization would actually be okay with. So you don't have to go through this headache of getting the right hardware to run things locally. That's the most secure option, and that's what IT is going to push you towards. But see if you can push back, because I think the privacy guarantees from these players are fairly strong, especially if your organization is already using Azure or AWS or GCP.
Yeah, great point there. So getting into our next question of how do you identify the essential components of a future-proof tech stack, especially in this current environment where things are rapidly advancing? There may be needs that arise over the next year or two that organizations would have a hard time anticipating right now in terms of the stress that would cause on their systems, various different aspects of their infrastructure. So what do you guys think are kind of as a framework for organizations to analyze right now, what their potential future tech stack needs may be? Nathan, why don't you kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I think this is a really hard question to answer, because as we were talking about earlier, this is a space that's moving a million miles a minute. So what's state of the art today might be a dinosaur tomorrow. So I think one key thing, again, at the individual level, is self-education. John, like, so Stefan, you were talking about this. I don't know who was saying this, but make sure that if you aren't know about this stuff, you can provide the handhold. You can educate people. You can educate yourself. I'll plug like one blog that I love in this space is Simon Willison's blog. He publishes pretty much every day, and I try to keep up with it as much as possible. So having knowledge about what's coming can be really helpful to decide what might make sense inside of your organization. I think also like avoid putting too much upfront investment in projects. We've talked about this a bit before, and obviously standing up your own model, trying to get things running inside of what your organization may or may not permit is expensive, time consuming, and there's long-term maintenance costs that are associated. So making that decision it's a big decision. And if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest, the fastest and most efficient way to do that is to play with a big player, unless you decide that it makes a lot of sense for your use case. So yeah, I mean, I think really it's about being educated on the individual level, watching what's coming out, keeping an eye on the space, and being aware of the problem that you're trying to solve before you put a big upfront investment in custom hardware, custom hosting solutions, all that good stuff, which might make sense, but make sure it's the right decision.
Yeah, the education piece is really critical right now. Stefan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I agree that this is a very complex issue. I think one piece of advice that's emerged from this discussion, it's come up a couple of times, is don't try to do things yourself. Try to use one of the existing platforms. Try to rely on one of the, even if it's one of the big players, the Googles, the Amazons, et cetera, or someone else. But one thing I think on the other side of that coin, watch out for vendor lock. Vendor lock is a thing that, because things are moving so rapidly and we don't yet have fully defined standards for things, and we may not even know what the right things are to be standardized. Like 2 years from now, everybody's opinion on this might be changed. One potential pitfall, is getting locked in with a particular vendor either may not even exist 2 years from now, the way things move. So that's one piece of advice that I would give to any organization is, as you're going through this, keep that in mind. Try to use open frameworks for APIs and things like that. Try out in POC format several different vendors, assess the differences between them, and use as part of their decision making, use this idea of like how painful would it be to switch later on if I decide that the choice I make today is not actually the choice I would have wanted to make 2 years from now. So that's one thing to keep an eye on for sure when it comes to future proofing.
Yeah, excellent point. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Don't lock yourself in with a particular provider. When you're using generative AI in your data infrastructure, choose a platform that allows you to plug and play the latest advancements from different vendors as they move forward in a governed way. As I mentioned before, that's the approach that we're trying to take, bringing AI tools to designer desktop is, being that plug and play where you can pull in different LLMs, because we don't know what the future is going to bring, and what new company is going to come up with a new LLM that does something really interesting that you're going to want to use.
Absolutely. So we're coming up on time, so I want to get to our lightning round, which is, what is your key takeaway for our audience today for aligning infrastructure with the needs of AI and data democratization? In one phrase or a couple, what's your number one key takeaway? Let's start with you, Stefan.
Yeah, so I think the major thing that an organization should keep in mind as they're going through this journey are to emphasize flexibility and adaptability, because things are changing so rapidly. But there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of risk, a lot of change. Nobody knows what the state of things is going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, let alone 5 or 10 years from now. And so the thing but we should plan on that. That's the thing that we should plan on, is that there is uncertainty, there will be change. That's the only thing we know for sure. And so building that in to your processes and your approach is the way to go.
Great point. Adaptability is key. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, to me, I think the core takeaway is always use verifiable analytics in tandem with AI strategies. The reason why I say that is LMs can make things up. And when we're working in an enterprise environment, we need to be really confident in the data that we're bringing forward. So any work that you're doing, always make sure you can verify it. Always make sure that your pipeline is easy to test, is easy to validate. Those things, those problems are never going to go away.
Great point. And I think identifying which use cases are most critical to have absolutely accurate data, which ones is 80% or 90% good enough, and which one do you need pretty much 100% accuracy, and maybe using that as part of your risk assessment for any use cases. Jonathan, the last word.
Yeah, and on that, I'll add one thing. The difference between 80% and 100% accurate may seem small, but it's very, very big. So
That's right. Jonathan?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'll just say, I've talked about it a couple times. Don't DIY. Choose a partner that provides a standard way to access LLMs in a governed manner, so you can move from POC to production quickly and safely.
Yeah, great point. I mean, build versus buy is always a big question within organizations, but I think particularly as fast moving as this space is, it's hard to internally to get your arms around everything, and often is much better to choose a partner who's already been there and done that with other organizations. So great points. Well, guys, really enjoyed it. Thank you for your excellent contributions and the great discussion. For those in our audience, thank you for joining us today. And if you missed any of the webinar or want to rewatch any of it, the recording will be available at this same URL just a few minutes after the webinar. If you just refresh the page, it'll also be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Thank you again to our partners, Alteryx, SandboxAQ, Plotly, and Zenlytic for making this webinar possible. And we'll see all of you again next time. Have a good one.